From the Maddy Institute, the Public Policy Institute for the Valley's 4 public universities, this is the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
There's no question that the COVID pandemic has impacted virtually every area of public policy. What do Democratic legislators from the Valley think are the best ways to address these issues? Our guests are Democratic State Senator Caballero and Democratic State Assemblymember Rudy Salas. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
So I want to ask you first, Senator Caballero, I want to ask you about Governor Newsom's budget. The non-partisan legislative analyst office said that we're going to have about a $15.5 billion surplus this year, but warns that going forward, we could have over $11 billion deficits if the legislature adopts the governor's proposal. So I'm just wondering, the governor's proposal is spending about half of this budget on one-time temporary purposes to deal with the pandemic. What do you think about this allocation? What do you think about this current budget that the governor's proposed?
So let me just say that I was around during the last downturn in the economy, the Great Recession. And since that time, I have supported taking revenue that comes in higher than expected and putting it into reserves. I think it's a really prudent thing to do so that you have money to use during the times like this when you have a very bad economy. So that's the reason that we have reserves, and that's the reason that we take these excess funds and continue to put them there. But what we know is that the economy is going to take a lot of work to come back. Many people have been out of work. They are at risk of losing their houses or losing their rental units. Small businesses have been asked to close. We need to do everything possible to be able to get them back working and do everything we can to stimulate the economy. So for the most part, I support what he's trying to do. It's just a question of what is the amount we should put into these programs.
Assemblymember Salas, what's your perspective?
Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, I think Anna's right on in terms of the budget and what we were doing. I've been here for the last couple of budget cycles, and, when the state had more money, we set it aside in the rainy day fund. And that's what the governor's looking at trying to use now, using, I think you talked about it, $15.5 billion in surplus revenue. But how do we spend that and what do we prioritize? Obviously, doing one-time funding is not going to create a structural deficit for us moving forward. So we're definitely going to be looking at that, right? We're a co-equal branch with the governor. The governor came out with this proposal in early January. We're going to be working through it through the legislature, but we're going to be asking those questions that Senator Caballero brought up, right? What are we doing in terms of not only pandemic response, but how are we getting our economy back moving again? How are we helping out our small businesses that employ so many people and are the backbone of California's economy? Like, how are we doing those things that are going to promote the economic engine so that we continue to move forward and have a strong economy here in California?
That's a great segue. I want to ask you, Senator Caballero, you are co-sponsoring something called SB 74, the Keep California Working Act, with Senator Borgeas, a Republican from Fresno, that would invest $2.6 billion in grants for small businesses and nonprofits impacted by COVID-19. I'm just wondering, why do you think that extra money is needed on top of what Governor Newsom's already proposed, President Biden's proposing? I want to get your perspective on that.
Well, first of all, SB 74 was authored and put into print before the federal government made a commitment to create another CARES package, if you will. So we know that's going to be beneficial. It may be that the federal government continues to create more. President Biden has another plan to put people back to work. And so what we were trying to do is to respond to the concerns that have been raised by small businesses that really are, as Rudy suggested, they're the backbone of our economy. And we want to make sure that we have enough resources to really make a difference. So let me give you an example. The governor, after SB 74 was put into print, created a program and put $560 million into that program, and is rolling out a small business grant effort. $235 million has been granted to date. They got close to 400,000 applications, and only 6% of the applications received a grant. There's still more money in that fund, but it's very clear that it's oversubscribed. And in reality, we picked $2.6 billion for SB 74 on the theory of taking 10% of the revenue that we had to use to push out into the economy. And in the end, that may be a really good number. It's closer to what is required if we're really going to provide an opportunity to stimulate small businesses all over the state.
I just want to only got about 10 seconds. Assemblymember Salas in this segment. You agree?
Yeah, definitely agree. Right, small businesses is our economic engine here in the state of California. We need to do more to promote that and help our locals get people to work and get our economy moving.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Well, up next, we're going to get the Republican side of the aisle, what they think about these issues. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Report. Now we're going to hear a Republican perspective on how to best deal with the challenges of the pandemic. Our guest is Republican State Senator Andreas Borgeas from Fresno. Welcome back to the Maddy Report.
Mark, it's great to be back on the show.
So let me ask you a question about the governor's budget. As you know, the governor proposed spending about half this year's $15.5 billion windfall on one-time or temporary purposes, and a lot of the rest going toward pandemic relief. Do you support that allocation?
Well, I certainly support spending a robust amount of these unexpected one-time dollars. The LAO's office, the Legislative Analyst's office, their report indicates that it's $26 billion. And so I think what we have here is a distinction in how accounting of expected versus required appropriations are classified. But moving forward with the idea that we have $26 billion, I think it is imperative, based on their recommendations also, that at least one half of that, which is $13 billion, be committed on a one-time basis to capital investment in dealing with the pandemic and its recovery.
You know, it's interesting.
Entirely appropriate.
It's interesting that you say that because, you know, initially the LAO did come out with 15.5 and now they've changed it to a higher number. But, you know, I've been doing this for years, and invariably when we've had Jerry Brown, he was always underselling the surplus, right? Because he wanted the legislature to set aside more money. It's his way of kind of controlling, frankly, the Democrats in the legislature. And maybe you're seeing a little bit of that again.
Well, also, Mark, the December numbers indicate that there's an additional unexpected $3 billion based on December's numbers. So these numbers are certainly fluid and depending on your calculations, which is why I think a lot of legislators prefer to go in line with the LAO's budget estimations because they're historically accurate.
Yeah, and the LAO is, for folks who don't know, they're the nonpartisan, kind of the budget experts. And so you have the Department of Finance, which is the governor's kind of projections, and then you have the legislative analyst, which is the nonpartisan projection. And if you like them, the LAO is great. If you don't like them, you'll make some excuses to why you don't like the LAO, I suppose. I'm wondering also about, are there any specific expenditures that you support or either support or oppose in the governor's budget?
Well, I think naturally, when you do a deep dive into a budget the size that California has, there's going to be things that you like, that you can tolerate, and absolutely dislike. And I think one of the things that stands out right now is that the budget appropriation for helping small businesses started off around $500 million. Well, we know that's relatively insignificant given the acuity of our needs in the state of California. That number has been supplemented with a new proposal for an additional 500 million plus. Even then, that number I think is inadequate. But if we have a round number of, let's say, $1 billion that is being proposed in total, the problem with that number is that the allocation for electric vehicles is $1.5 billion. So I think one has to wonder, given our circumstances and what we've experienced for the last 11 months in the COVID drawdown, should electric vehicles be of higher priority to the tune of 1.5, but rescuing and supporting the backbone of the California economy be at 1 billion?
Yeah, well, two things. One, I just want to clarify that of the 1.5 billion going to electric vehicles, 2/3 of that is going to infrastructure, charging stations. 1/3 is going to electric vehicles themselves. But let me talk specifically about something that you proposed with Senator Caballero, this Keeping California Working Act, $2.6 billion for small businesses, about 1% of the state budget. I mean, you say 2.6 billion, oh, that's nothing, it's nothing when you compare it to the state budget of $227 or so billion. But you're proposing that, a bipartisan effort, lot of support. Why do you think it's important?
Well, I think it's not just important; it's essential, Mark. The 2.6 billion is 10% of the unexpected one-time revenue that the state has right now. So that's 10% of the 26 billion. The LAO's office, as we mentioned before, is recommending at least half of that, 13 billion, be put into capital investment. The Keep California Working Act, SB 74, I introduced that in December along with my Senate colleague on the other side of the aisle, Caballero. And I got to tell you, in this hyper-partisan environment, all we have to do is look at the impeachment proceedings and the adjudication in the Senate in D.C. to understand that things are not functioning well. But this is something that is functioning very well. SB 74, as of yesterday, has more than one half of the entire state legislature that is signed on. That's 63 legislators out of 120, because they understand the acuity of our needs, that small businesses that have suffered through this experience, this COVID experience, and during the vaccine distribution period that's forthcoming, are going to need help. And this is a capital investment in the future of California, one that cannot go unanswered, because that would be intolerable.
All right. We'll have more of this conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. This is Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. There's a saying that when there's a crisis, it presents both a danger and an opportunity. Does the COVID-19 pandemic create an opportunity to build a better California? Our guests are Democratic State Senator Andreas Caballero and Democratic State Assemblymember Rudy Salas. So, Assemblymember Salas, I wanted to ask you, former State Controller Steve Wesley had an interesting article recently where he was talking about the COVID-19 pandemic as an opportunity to reform California's tax system and kind of spread the tax burden to make it less dependent on the vicissitudes of the stock market. As you know, we have this great surplus because the stock market did well because we rely so much on capital gains. Is it the right time to try to attack that very big third rail issue in politics?
Yeah, let me answer your question right off the segment, right? Do these crises present an opportunity? I want to say absolutely they do. Present an opportunity to look at a lot of different issues, not just what Mr. Wesley mentioned in his article for tax reform, but even looking at the deficiencies that we see here in the state of California. You know, I know I'm working with Senator Caballero and a number of other legislators where we're looking at the pandemic and looking at something like just broadband access for students in rural areas and in the Central Valley where they had to work from home. So we're going to try to use what happened during the pandemic to prioritize and highlight the definite need for things like that. You know, when you look at the tax base, which you alluded to with the former controller, you know, there's always an opportunity to look at these things, but we also need to make sure that we're understanding all of the different impacts. I know the LAO looked at some of these excise taxes and what that actually means, and what the LAO, our legislative analyst office, what they concluded was, you know, sometimes it doesn't have the intended effect that people think it's going to have, and it actually ends up hurting because it either, you know, when you talked about like capital gains, for instance, if you tax somebody so much, then they end up going to other states or other places around the world where they basically have like tax havens, and then we lose out on that revenue because then you've oversubscribed it. And so,
I just want to make, some of our audience probably knows about the Legislative Analyst Office because we have them on a regular basis, but those that don't, it's a nonpartisan office. That's kind of the budget experts. So that's what Assemblymember Rudy Salas is referring to there. Can I ask Senator Caballero, what is your thought on this?
You know, there always is an opportunity during a crisis. You just got to figure out which are the opportunities you're going to jump on right away. The tax issue is just fraught with all kinds of challenges. And what you want to do is make sure it's fair. And as Rudy said, that you're not ending up chasing people out of the state of California. Frankly, the kinds of issues that I'm focused on trying to take it to really solve is the broadband issue. Rural California has been disproportionately impacted because we don't have adequate broadband accessibility, and our students are really behind the eight ball on because of that. Number two is we have a very inadequate healthcare system, and it's reflected in the amount of coronavirus in the farm worker community, which does not have access to medical services and has been disproportionately impacted. So there are so many issues, whether we're talking about education, whether we're talking about access, that we're now going to be dealing with, in addition to the homelessness and the housing crisis, again, which has really been exacerbated because of COVID. So many things that need to be resolved. It's hard to decide that taxes are going to be more important.
Right.
Especially when you say that and everybody's hair goes up.
Right. Hair goes on fire.
On fire, right.
I wanted to go back to Assemblymember Salas, because you point out an interesting thing. You're talking about, both of you, talking about the digital divide. I'm just wondering, do you think this presents the pandemic actually presents an opportunity to reimagine the California economy, to make both businesses more competitive, but also close that income inequality gap that we're seeing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this pandemic highlighted that the need, why we need to have broadband. Everybody saw it when kids were studying from home and had to log in. But you have communities like Lost Hills or places out in the valley where they're having a hard time just having a consistent internet connection. So it highlights the deficiencies that are out there. And I would say, being able to have access to high-speed internet is now essential. It's just as essential as having electricity and making sure that you're having clean water, because then you're gonna create inequities by not allowing these kids to actually go to school and to do that online. And so, telemedicine is the other big thing, because we don't have access to as many doctors and nurses. We've pushed legislation. I've had some legislation signed by the governor recently too, to actually help push more telemedicine programs and to promote it. So whether it's like mental health or dermatology or any other reason somebody needs to go see a doctor, a lot of times in the valley, and especially during the pandemic when you weren't supposed to be moving to bigger, larger population centers, this is a great way for people to connect to their doctors and get help.
Closing the digital divide is not a panacea, but I tell you, it hits a lot of topics. It's education, telework, telemedicine, pretty significant. I want to thank you very much for giving your insights on that. Up next, we're going to hear from the Republican perspective on these issues. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We've heard from the Democrats about what they're going to do to deal with some of the pandemic issues. We're now going to hear a Republican perspective with Fresno Republican State Senator Andreas Borgeas. I wanted to ask you about, the situation with the budget. It's interesting. Steve Wesley, the former controller, said that, what you're seeing is the impact of high-income taxpayers, what their impact they're having on the budget. That's why we have the surplus. And he's saying, maybe this is an opportunity to kind of reevaluate how we deal with revenue and making it more evenly distributed. What are your thoughts on this? Is this an opportunity to kind of address a big third rail issue, tax reform?
Well, I always think that if given the opportunity that we should certainly address taxes and ways to improve the efficiency and accountability of the government. I think what we have here, though, is kind of an unexpected revelation. And I don't know the individual to whom you're referring, but I think it's pretty well known throughout the state that a significant portion of our taxes come from a very small percentage of the highest earning levels of the state. And that kind of begs the question, is this sustainable? And I think the answer is showing that it probably isn't if we continue on this track forward. And what I mean by that is that at the highest earners, the most highly educated, the most highly qualified, the most highly skilled folks that are part of the California economy are contributing the most. The instinctive reaction to that is that you keep on going back to the well. And I think what's going to happen, and we've seen this with corporations and major symbolic leaders in industries, is that California is not as attractive as it once was. All anybody has to do is pick up a newspaper and see, that Tesla and other icons of industry are relocating or partially relocating to other states like Texas and Arizona. So if you're thinking about skilled labor following industry, if you're looking at standard of living, the cost of living, and the upward mobility of populations, if they're being absolutely maxed out in terms of tax levies, it's only a matter of time, and we've already seen it, before that begins to drip away. And so it's unsustainable.
But you have to have revenue. State has to have revenue. So would you be interested in something that was maybe revenue neutral, but spread the the tax burden a little bit more equally?
Well, I think I'd be interested in learning more from experts in the field. What are some of their recommendations? Absolutely. And if there's a meritorious review of how we can improve our tax situation, I would absolutely love to be a part of that and learn so much more. We've heard this at the national level about having a flat line or standard baseline tax, whether it be income or whether it be purely sales. We've seen other examples across the globe, but if you take a look at our tax code, both you and I are attorneys. You can't make heads or tails of it. So if you're thinking, at the state level,
when you say that, I remember looking at the IRS regulations on income, which is like section 61, one section in the IRS code. You go to the regulations, it goes on for volumes, fills up most of the books behind me. Let me ask a quick question, because I want to get this in, and that is this whole issue of, post-pandemic, maybe there's an opportunity here to help make businesses more competitive, really improve the California economy, and maybe deal with this issue of income inequality. Other than tax cuts, are there other things that the state maybe can do, whether it's closing the digital divide, and enhancing apprenticeship opportunities that can make businesses more competitive, but also close that income inequality gap?
Great questions. As an educator, this is something that is near and dear to my heart. The opportunities for folks to go to school, at least our generation and ones before it was premised on the affordability of education. Now, we've now seen that college and university, by and large, is becoming less and less affordable. So if you want to talk about the competitiveness of the workforce and the upward mobility of those that intend to get into it, you're going to have to look comprehensively at what not just the California, but the American experience and what we can expect. But from my standpoint, I believe in strong vocational education, hearkening back to a period of time where people learned skills that were needed, because that is the generation of entrepreneurs. Fresno State, for example, where you are, is a perfect example of an institution that is focusing in on entrepreneurship, because in the Valley, where both of us are from, we have a super service economy that is heavily ag dependent. So diversifying our economic base is essential.
Yeah, no question about it. Well, I want to thank our guest, State Senator Andreas Borgeas, as well as also State Senator Ana Caballero and Assemblyman Rudy Salas. Thanks for joining us. This is the Maddy Report. The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about today's episode of the Maddy Report, please visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.